Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that's hopefully for somebody. I'm your host, Kyle Naranya, joined by now returning special guest, managing editor, author of it's such a long title, Sean. It's messing me up again. With Great Power, How Spider-Man Conquered the Golden Age of Comic Book Blockbusters.
There you go. You
Did
got
I
it.
get it? I got it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Nice job.
Thank you. I have read and listened to the audiobook, so I was hoping it was in there somewhere.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, so I'm hoping, unlike your first appearance, there are no technical issues today. They were all on my end, but I'm very gracious that you are returning to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you having me back.
I would have my prop, but it's actually downstairs. It's packed, ready to go. I have the book somewhere.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Yes. So we are, of course, here. If you're following the show on Twitter or myself personally, Sean is here to talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, the long-awaited sequel to the 2018 Academy Award-winning animated film. There will be a non-spoiler discussion of the show and a spoiler discussion. So if you have not had a chance to see it yet, don't worry, those time codes are listed in the description. So let's jump into the non-spoiler discussion. There will be no plot elements to worry about, just general feelings about the overall experience.
Okay, and you've seen it too, am I correct?
I have. I saw it last night at 6:30.
Okay, very nice.
Yes.
You want me to go first?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I mean, I don't have words for how good this movie is. You know, I wish I did. And I'm still wrestling. I get to see it again tomorrow night at 7 and going in the IMAX format, which I didn't get to see it in IMAX the first time through. And I just I hold the original, I hold Into the Spider-Verse at such a high standard. I mean, to me, it was the quintessential Spider-Man movie. It had every element that you would hope to get out of a Spider-Man movie. It had the origin stories, the loss of a close loved one, the sacrifices that one has to make in order to become Spider-Man, filtered through multiple variants, and not just the normal variants that you would expect from a multiverse movie, but like these deep dive pulls from the Spider-Man lore, essentially, with Spider-Ham and Spider-Noir, and obviously Spider-Gwen being really popular nowadays. That I thought, like, there's no way. How do you top this? How on earth can you make a movie that's better than Into the Spider-Verse? But it's not just that Across the Spider-Verse is better; it's how much better it is. Like it's 50 times better. It's 100 times better. It takes everything that worked about the original one and amplifies every single aspect of it. The animation, you have to start with the animation. It's almost cliche to say it now because so many people are praising it, but it's unlike anything that I've ever seen before. It does more with the multiverse than any of these current multiverse stories have been able to do. And I mean, even on a root level, in that when you go to a different universe, it changes animation, it changes colors, it changes the look. You realize you're in a different world, whether it be the Indian version of Manhattan or Miguel O'Hara's landscapes, or of course Gwen's world, which are these gorgeous watercolor paintings that are spectacular to look at. Even there are moments when characters peer through into other multiverses and you get these completely off the wall versions of Spider-Man universes. It's just creative. Like it approaches the multiverse concept from such a creative way. And then it's just so rewarding, the journeys that all of these characters go on. Like Miles has a great arc, Gwen has a great arc, Peter B has a great arc, Miguel O'Hara has an excellent arc. I can't say enough great things about it. I mean, I truly think that it's the best Spider-Man movie. I honestly think I have to see it again to determine it tomorrow. I think it's my favorite movie that I've ever seen. And that's as a diehard Spider-Man fan. But like for it to do the amount of things that it does right as a Spider-Man fan, it floored me.
I was having a physical reaction just thinking about it. So it's I guess just over 24 hours since I started the experience. I sat down with one of my best friends. We see pretty much every blockbuster together. high praise for the first one. It is, in my opinion, and we've talked about this. So if you want to go back to Sean's first episode, your favorite Spider-Man, period, was Chris Pine's Peter Parker
That's true. I have been
in the
saying that. Yes.
first one. And so the what I appreciate so much about the first film, Into the Spider-Verse, before getting into how I felt about Across the Spider-Verse, was I remember talking to my friends and the film community people that I knew when it was announced, like, why are you doing this? Because the avenues of exploring a Spider-Man film and animation typically do not reach the levels like something like the first film.
Sure.
And the first film, I don't think winning an Academy Award is the bar that every actor or any film related job should strive for. It is a level of excellence that I think the industry acknowledges as significant, and winning an award where a category that has typically been taken over by a company owned by Disney, whether that's Pixar or Walt Disney Animation, is something to be said. I
Sure.
don't know if you're aware of this, but there was an accidental early release of Ralph Breaks the Internet, where it had Academy Award winning Best Animated Film
Okay.
prior to the Oscars at that time, which I found quite funny, and obviously Into the Spider-Verse did win deservingly so. The bar that I did not want to set going into this was very high. I tried actively to avoid doing so because in my experience, the higher you want the bar to be in the expectations you put in front of you, you can either be dramatically disappointed or it can meet your expectations, but that's not thoroughly an enjoyable experience. Yeah, I thought this was going to be great. It was great. And you move on, and the
Mhm.
impact is lessened in a way. And while I'm somebody who watches trailers and I try not to analyze every single frame, the only analogy that I've been able to come up with, and I haven't seen it anywhere yet, to describe the experience that I had, and I tried not to tweet my reaction to this. I had a couple. Jermaine, you DM'd me asking what I thought, and we're recording it now, so you'll hear this. Is that I said animation is art, because there have been some that have put down what this art form is capable of.
Mhm.
And the analogy that I came up with was, if, in my mind at least, if the first film is The Godfather,
Mhm.
where your experience was, this is something I did not expect or didn't know this form of cinema was capable of. And the
Mhm.
first Godfather is a phenomenal film. Some
Mhm.
say it's one of the best films of all time. But Across the Spider-Verse is Godfather Part 2, where
That's dead on.
everything you love about that movie is just raised to every degree. I've been talking about this to anybody who would listen today, that I've been a longtime fan of Phil Lord and Chris Miller. There are other people involved in this film that I'm going to get to, where every lesson they have learned in their writing history or the directorial history seems to lead breadcrumbs, if not lessons required to tell the kind of story in this. Because
Sure.
I'm not a writer of fiction. I've seen a ton of movies and television and taken the occasional film class in college. But if you were to explain what happens in the movie outside of specific dialogues, wow, specific interactions or conversations that characters have with each other, it may not seem special if you're giving somebody the Spark Notes version of the film. And
Mhm.
one of the pun intended, superpowers that Lord and Miller seem to have is taking the expected and the tropes of the genre and using them to the best possible facets, whether that is dialogue about somebody's responsibility, which, if you are listening to a podcast review the second Spider-Verse film, you are aware what the weight of responsibility is in the canon of Spider-Man.
Sure.
And they are pushing this form of entertainment to levels I didn't think were possible. And there's going to be a lot of hyperbole about what this movie is. And it's a running joke on film Twitter that a lot of films come out and it's the best movie ever or it's the worst movie ever.
Sure. Yeah.
But there are rare opportunities to call things in this genre, specifically comic book films, which is what we're here to discuss tonight, like masterpieces. Or perfect is not a word I like to use, because if you really want to be critical, there are elements of this that I could. But in terms of spectacle, you've talked about the main characters' arcs. This is unlike any experience I've had with a character who I've loved since I was a child. And I don't think it's unfortunate, but being somebody who has grown up with this character, we talked about this last time you were on, and of what the impact is and when you are exposed to the webhead. And it brings me such joy in the very first Spider-Man costume that I ever owned. I still have, and it's one my son runs around in.
That's
And
awesome.
he loves Spider-Man. But the I think the satisfaction in people who have seen the different iterations of this character are what enhance this experience. We've seen the 60s show, we've
Mm.
seen Spider-Man and his amazing friends, the 90s cartoon, so on and so forth. One of my favorite versions was the Spectacular Spider-Man, which he's on the poster, so this is not a spoiler.
Yeah. Yeah.
That version is in the film.
It's so
But
funny when he shows up too, because you're like, who's this misshapen Spider-Man?
yes, because he was not designed for 3 dimensions. He was specifically a character designed for 2D.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm jealous of the youth, and I mean, I'm not old, but if the first film and this film is your first experience with these characters, how jealous I am that you did not have to live through the so-so stuff to get to where we are today.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in a way, you're right. You're jealous, but like, how do they go back and
You
relive,
can't.
the stuff that we view as important to us, because the bar has been raised. So I almost feel like you have to separate these two films into their own little corner and realize that because of the limitations of live action, it's nearly impossible for any of the pre-existing, even something like No Way Home, which tried to do, what it could with the concept of the multiverse and bringing in canon aspects of Spider-Man's legacy. There was only so much they could do and make it as believable. Animation allows them to do things that are wildly difficult in live action. And I don't want to give any specific examples just yet, but we'll get into those into the spoiler conversations. But one of the things I want to drill down on that elaborate a bit more on what you just said is Phil Lord and Chris Miller's ability to see in the mundane or the unexpected something spectacular. And they've been doing this their entire career when you think about it. They took these Lego bricks, and built a franchise in a way that no one could have expected, and it started with the Lego movie, but it branched into the Lego Batman movie. It branched into Lego movie got its own sequel. Obviously, a lot of these things went to direct DVD. That core element of taking Legos and thinking about them in a different way elevated that franchise. They did it for 21 Jump Street. When everybody was taking television shows and trying to figure out how to revamp them for a new generation, those guys figured out the right way to do it. They do with the Spider-Verse movies, and it's expanded on so much more in this one, by introducing the idea that there is canon for every Spider person. Like, no matter who you are as Spider-Man, there are canon beats that you have to hit. They comprehend that reality, and then through the character of Miles, they question it. They test it. They tug at it, and they challenge it. And I find that to be really, really exciting, because the way that they figured out how to do it is by using a villain who in the comics is a joke. Like, the Spot is a joke, and yet he becomes the perfect villain for this idea, and the way that they trace him back to the first movie is, again, genius. They take a moment a beat from the first movie, and they're like, oh, that's going to become the origin story of our powerful villain for the next two movies. No one thinks that way. And it's
No,
just remarkable.
it is unexpected yet somehow so brilliant is the best thing. There is very little to be able to talk about outside of the overall experience for this that I think we've been able to get through. If you don't, or if you miss out on seeing this in theaters, I think you have missed an opportunity. There's going to be a lot of June is the month of blockbusters
Yeah.
over the next couple weeks. I think it's clear that Sean and I recommend this to you. So without having to be vague about anything, because it's very true, the brilliance of this is in those details that Lord and Miller and all the cast included are able to get to. Do you want to jump into spoilers, Sean?
I would love to. I want to just emphasize before we do move forward that I think IMAX or and Dolby are the ways to do this, and you're only going to get a week to do that because Transformers is coming right behind this, and Transformers is going to take over those formats in a heartbeat. It's become an issue of the industry, and that all of these blockbusters want IMAX time, and so if you don't get out right away to see the movies that warrant the IMAX treatment, you lose it after a week. And so Spider-Verse is one of those. So just heed that warning. I would advise going out to see it as quickly as you can.
I concur with that as well. I think unfortunately in Canada, specifically Ontario, it starts on Wednesday
Okay.
for Transformers. So you've got the weekend
Oh boy.
and the Monday and the Tuesday. So yes, I would concur with that. All right. If you do not want to hear spoilers for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, you have been warned. This is going to be the fun part where we get into the nitty-gritty of the movie. Okay, so you were talking about The Spot.
Yes.
And voiced incredibly by Jason Schwartzman.
Perfect.
Yep.
He's perfect. And I mean, almost everybody who they've chosen to do voice work is perfect, but Jason Schwartzman as the Spot is absolutely hysterical.
Now, have you gone? So we're talking. We're in full spoilers, and you talked about his origins. Have you had a chance yet to go back and see if that is what the bagel guy looks like?
Yes, and in fact, we mentioned it to Phil Lord and Chris Miller when they came on the Real Blend podcast, where I asked them like, what is something that you would have put into the first movie to help you on parts 2 and 3, and they said they would have changed the look of
the
Dr. whomever his name is. But I said, was it a coincidence that he got hit by one of the only breakfast foods that has a hole in it? And Chris Miller said, no, that is not a coincidence at all. We knew at that point that he was going to be Spot. So I find that to be pretty remarkable.
That's what, and one of the things I find most impressive about this, and there are films that share parallels with this, and the only one that I could sort of think of that did the opposite in terms of coming up with a film, and obviously most big blockbusters these days are attempting some form of post-credit scene to tease what may be coming in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And a series that I think tried its best to continue on with after a very successful first film, and it's a weird parallel, but was, in my opinion, Pirates of the Caribbean Black Pearl told a complete story, and there was very little room to pull anything that was left over into the following sequels, like small details that seem tangential. But Across the Spider-Verse, I think, does the opposite, because the story had such focus, specifically, I would say more so on Miles and Peter B. Parker, that having some of, specifically Gwen, the first, I think it's 10 minutes of the film opens with Gwen Stacy's universe.
If not more than that.
If
that's
not more than that.
A long sequence with against the Vulture in that museum. That's a long sequence.
When we talked about the different art styles, the Leonardo da Vinci style Vulture, like I can't, as somebody who's watched a colossal amount of animation, I don't have a way of describing how he's animated.
Yeah, no, I know.
Because they did the 12 by 24 frames for Miles in the first film. I guess I should explain that if the listeners aren't aware. Typically, a regular 2D animated film is done on twos, which means for a regular film, there's 24 frames per second. But for a regular 2D animated film, it's 12 frames per second. So the character is holding a position for double the time.
Mhm.
But Miles in the first film, until the What's Up Danger scene, or the leap as it's known in Into the Spider-Verse, he was on twos while Gwen and Peter B were done on ones, meaning they were animated in 24 frames per second,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is again the film animation levels. And also something, I don't know if you noticed this, which was in the opening for the scene or for the film where we see the, I don't even know how many versions of the logos over top. There's a
Oh yeah.
small cough at the bottom
Okay.
of the screen in the right, very bottom right hand corner. Do you know what that's a reference to?
No, I don't. I did see it, but I don't know what it was.
So it is an Easter egg where I'm gonna be mad at myself if I don't remember which one it was. But in either of the Jump Streets, I think it's 22 Jump Street. When you went and saw it in theaters, at the back left channel, they put a cough over one of the logos
Okay.
just to get the audience to think somebody coughed behind them. It
Are
never
you
made it in any.
kidding me? Are you
Yes.
kidding me?
Yeah, and the only reason I'm aware of that is I've listened to the commentary tracks for both of those movies
Okay.
multiple times because it's equally as funny as the movie.
They are lunatics, Lord and
Yes,
Miller.
they are.
They're honestly lunatics.
It's the experience I think this film provides, the way I would describe it is how I've seen people talk about the first time they saw the first Avatar.
Okay.
Just in terms of what is possible. And I think it's most interesting given how we just had another Avatar film. Obviously, the gap was significantly larger with the James Cameron film franchise.
Sure.
But we talked about it in the non-spoiler section, just the level of precision in the different art styles and the
Mhm.
focus on the there is a almost a new crew of focuses. We get a Spider Woman, we get Spider Punk,
Mhm.
who is the
He's
standout
incredible.
of this film, I would
He's
argue.
incredible. Yeah.
And what they do with that character, I thoroughly enjoy. Like Daniel Kaluuya as, oh, it's again at pitch perfect casting all the way through. And go ahead.
One element that I love is that when those characters move into another universe, they bring their style with them.
Hmm.
Like Spider-Punk has that never mind the bollocks, Sex Pistols, blocky, animation and graphic around him, and it goes with him wherever he goes,
It's like
which I think is
newsprint
fantastic.
to some degree, like fading in and
Yes.
out all the time.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
it's absolutely it's the puns are so funny because the way you would describe this film are all monikers for Spider-Man. It's like it's spectacular, it's amazing, it's
Yeah.
the ultimate multiverse movie. But what I appreciate more about this, and there's been a conversation, people are putting out their tier list for Spider-Man films in the response to this. We are recording this the day after the public is able to see it, so I can
Mhm.
only imagine what the conversation is going to be like afterwards. But you mentioned it earlier, the benefit of this being animation and the time taken to make the film. Blockbusters nowadays, it's 2 sometimes 3 year development, and they've had up to, obviously the pandemic has affected things significantly, but 4+ years to work on this. And while the multiverse, I would argue, has been used to some degree as a gimmick in the other Marvel universe,
Sure.
not 616, but
Right.
99999,
Yeah.
and how this film embraces everything you love about the variety of the character. We talked about the different versions that show up, and I was super happy that two of my favorite versions actually had speaking roles, with Insomniac's Spider-Man from the PlayStation 4 game, with
Nice.
Yuri Lowenthal and Josh Keaton as the Spectacular Spider-Man. In
Right.
the
Right.
you mentioned it already. The weirdest transition from 2D into CG. He's so short and
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
looks
Yeah.
like he's inflated as opposed to animated to be cell. It was ridiculous.
It's great. I love it though. It's so distinct for fans
It's
who know it.
oh, it's hilarious. That I believe the series is available on Disney Plus now. All the rights are so
Oh, is it?
weird because
Okay.
it was a Sony produced. It was the last Sony produced Spider-Man cartoon before the
Okay.
rights went over to Disney. But what makes this so special is, the spectacle is a significant amount. You're going to see these movies with your eyes, but they managed to make the emotional story even more of a gut punch for
Mhm.
what we experience with, I would say, the main three characters. Like the parents level of conversations, I don't
Mhm.
have teenagers, so I'm just sort of sitting here hoping I learn anything I can use later on when my kids are at those ages. But the interactions and having Miles grow up, like continuing to grow up and be that teenager who anybody can relate to.
Mhm.
The job of Spider-Man is just the thing he does when he's not doing what people want him to be doing. He's why
Right.
he's It's why any version of the character is so relatable. The message of the last film was anybody can wear the mask,
Right.
and the development of those relationships is so special, and what makes the we'll get to it, but the ending of the film such a gut punch in where Miles ends up. But tracking that way all the way through, specifically the one that I was most curious about was Gwen, and with the movie opening up focusing on her, it's the film does present her and Miles as more co-leads as opposed to Miles being the focus.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, this more becomes her movie, in the way that the first one was a lot of Peter B. Parker's movie and him coming to terms with the problems that he's going through and almost being a mentor to Miles by working through his own stuff. This was, again, a heavy Gwen movie, which makes me wonder what Beyond is going to become. And we can get into speculation for that in a little bit if you want to. The element that I want to elaborate on, and it goes into a lot of what you're talking about, in how it celebrates all these different things that are important about Spider-Man, is that it feels like, and you don't get this very often with most of the superhero movies, because there's just so many people that have to work on them. But it feels like every person who contributed to this at every level loves the character and loves the lore. So that even the littlest things um, hit you in a way that are special and unique to Spider-Man fans. And I'll give you an example. When they have to talk about the canon of how in every one of our universes, Captain George Stacy has to die. You could just say that if you wanted to, but they use the panels that are pulled directly from the comics of the moment where the rocks are falling and Captain Stacy pushes that boy out of the way. There's a moment where the Spider-Man from 1960s is, completing his swing and coming right at the camera, and these are elements that are pulled in because there's knowledge of the character's history and an adoration of the character's history. They're not strict beats, that are essential to the thing. They're included in there because they know that what they are making is a love letter to the character and the character's extremely rich history. And one of the things we were talking about with Phil and Chris on the Ribblend podcast was, did they put a Stan Lee cameo in? And they didn't. And they thought it was, they actually used the term macabre. They thought it was a little macabre that they didn't want to include a version of a person when they didn't have the ability to give their permission, even though they believe he would have enjoyed it and would have easily put himself into the movie. But they said instead, what lives on is what Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created, because the formula and the template for the character is what still lives on to this day and is able to be applied to every different version of the multiversal Spider-Mans. That it doesn't matter which one you're talking about, the core aspects that Stan and Steve instilled in the character are still relevant to Miles and to Gwen and to Miguel O'Hara and to Spider-Punk. It's like, that's in and of itself remarkable, because we've seen so many other studios wrestle with, what is my interpretation of this superhero going to be? And quite often it's going in a direction that the fans don't want. So far, to me, Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse have completely understood what makes Spider-Man. And instead of drifting away from it, they've enveloped it with love and passion, and just made the quintessential experience for fans who adore the character. And you would think that that's not unique. Like everyone who's going into a superhero movie to make a story about fill in the blank character should do everything that they can to embrace what's good and special about that character. But I feel now I realize, having talked about this, the other movies don't do it the way that the Spider-Verse movies do. They truly embrace everything that's great about Spider-Man and work it into their story.
It's it's something that should be felt when you are handling something that matters to a fan base like Spider-Man. There is a reason his face was the logo for Marvel Comics for such a long time. And what makes it most interesting is there have been criticisms laid towards other characters from the Spider-Man lore that Sony have handled that you could argue did not handle it in this way. And the fact that the framework for the movie challenges that idea of what created the character of Spider-Man to begin with is so compelling, where the death of Gwen Stacy, or the death of a police captain, George Stacy, being something so important to Miles and Gwen at that particular moment in their lives is so significant. But the fact that, and it goes to show the kind of person Miguel O'Hara is in this universe, that he was able to challenge every other Spider person who, in existing, has already been created from tragedy, but challenges that whole idea of saving everyone is the mission. And it was something I was concerned about, given how this is not a good sentence, but you don't want to like specifically the spider people we were introduced to. And in the marketing material, I was very, not nervous, but hesitant about, well, Gwen and Peter B, they know what Miles has been through. And the fact that the movie is able to explain that in Miles is an anomaly, helps settle in, like, the scope of everything is so important that what we thought was our driving force, there's another level beyond that, in where the canon events that need to happen, so it's the death of an uncle and so on and so forth, likely, and I'm very curious, the minor speculation leading into Beyond, the death of a romantic love interest is another significant one, depending on who that is. And you could argue Gwen has already experienced that with the death of Peter Parker as the Lizard. He looks
became the Lizard. How crazy is that?
More iguana, I think, in this version.
Fair enough.
Less intimidating name. Do they count? I guess, is a lizard? I'm not a biologist, but that element of the character's core being challenged because of, well, we either do this or if we don't, everything fails. And it is what pushes Miles and proves why he is so special. And getting to see all of the spiders, people chase him through, and like getting to see all the different art styles focused into one was, again, it's impossible to prepare you for the variety and the significance of every art style you could possibly think of. Like, there is we talked about Lego, there is a Lego sequence in the film, and
which is hysterical.
And I'd be very curious, and I'd be willing to bet that it is the Daily Bugle set that came out very recently. Has to be. Yeah. And thankfully the rights are no longer owned by Warner Brothers, because that sequence probably would not have been possible.
Oh my God, that was 4 to 5 years ago. So funny.
The choice of sound effects we have, I guess technically there's multiple cameos then from J.K. Simmons, who's the universe's J. Jonah Jameson, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But you talk about the respect for the lore, and one of the best things about No Way Home was it gave fans of the other two live action versions respect, and not your version sucks, the Marvel version's the best, and weird connection. But as somebody who's been a longtime Power Ranger fan, team up episodes throughout the history of the show sometimes suffer to balance, well, the old team is better than the new team because they've been doing it longer. It's balancing
Gotcha.
those characters and making each version spectacular is the necessity and the goal. And the love and care taken into all of these is something that is, it's palpable, is the only way I can describe sitting through the experience of the film, because Miles's whole challenge is he is Spider-Man. The film establishes that for us. Like he is, you could argue, on par with the versions that we experienced with in the first one. We get a fun sequence where they're swinging through his version of, I think he's in Brooklyn. So Brooklyn, and oh,
Mm,
can you do this cool move? Can you do that?
mm,
But, and again, we talked about like the checklist of things you can do. The second act betrayal that is typically in any film you can think of. One character was lying. Oh no, what is the
yeah.
resolve going to be in that? But following that through with Gwen's character is treated in a way where we understand her choices, as opposed to it a reveal to the audience because you're in on it from the beginning.
Yes, but let's also talk about the better twist, since we're in
Okay.
spoiler territory,
Yep. Let's do it.
which is Miles was never supposed to become Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Did not see that coming, and I know Spider-Man lore backwards and forwards. And let me tell you something that's so incredibly cool. When the spider arrives in Miles' universe in Into the Spider-Verse, it glitches.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't quite know what the glitches mean, but in this one we learned that if you're not in your proper universe, you glitch.
Mm-hmm.
So they were telling us in Into that this spider is not in its right universe, and this is why it's glitching when it bites him. But the moral repercussions
Mm-hmm.
of this kid who we have watched struggle now through two movies to live up to the expectation of being Spider-Man, when you find out that he wasn't necessarily destined to be, and the world that truly I hope we get to spend a lot of time in is this Earth 42,
Mm-hmm.
because I want to know what happens when no one gets bit. When there's supposed to be a Spider-Man and we don't get it because of some butterfly effect. I want to see what happens in that world. I don't want to rush right through it and get Miles, Alpha Miles, I guess, real Miles, out of that jam too quickly, because I really want to see what the payoff is going to be there. But I didn't. Did you see that coming? That the spider was not supposed to be in his universe?
No, I did myself an unfortunate. I wished I had watched Into the Spider-Verse beforehand, but I didn't. And it's a twist that, again, the forethought to do it in the previous version or in the previous film, they're playing three-dimensional chess, and I'm playing tic-tac-toe,
Yeah.
because the impact is immediately felt with when Miguel says, "Your Peter died because you exist."
Yeah.
And the guilt that must be going through Miles, and hasn't really been addressed yet in the film, right? Because he's more dealing with, I've got to save my dad, because in his universe, which is like 65, I think. No, what is he? He's a long number. I want to say it's 1610 or 1612. It doesn't matter. But the Miles's universe we've spent time in.
616, isn't it?
No, because 616 is the comic. So I think 61, let me look this up. I'm
Okay.
fairly certain 616 is Peter B. Parker.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I think so. Because it doesn't matter. Numbers are numbers. Kevin Feige would argue which one is 616, but that's not what we're going to do.
Correct.
And that his father is going to become the police captain. Like that's the
Right.
focus. So it hasn't even been addressed yet with Miles, but seeing I did not there's a bunch of cameos in the film. We do get to see Donald Glover as a version of the Prowler, which was amazing. Getting to see
Oh
some
my
version.
god, that was so funny.
It was very,
Yet
very
another
funny.
amazing payoff.
What if he was still webbed to the back of the car?
It wears out in a couple of minutes. He should have had melted ice cream with him.
Yeah, well, ice cream soup. It's still delicious. And we get to see we do get there is a I wouldn't classify it as a cameo, but we see references to Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. We get to see
Sure.
that one of the deaths of a Captain Stacy is Andrew Garfield's from
Yep.
The Amazing Spider-Man 1. And it is one of the and this is why I'm going to be seeing this in 2 days in IMAX. So I'm very much looking forward to getting to see it on the biggest screen possible. But every single thing that gets planted in this is paid off.
Yes.
Yet the cliffhanger, it reminded me of films that I grew up with, like something like Back to the Future 2, where everything's gone to hell, quite literally, in this Earth 42, where we're in full-blown spoilers. Miles is the Prowler.
Right.
And seeing... My brain just turned to mush. What is his uncle's name?
Aaron.
Seeing Aaron back was not something I expected. Mahershala Ali back as that character.
Right.
But... And we've talked about this throughout the entire podcast so far, but knowing what these canon elements are and specific historic points are for every version of Spider people, and what that means to the character to see somebody that they have lost back from the dead. What is obviously Miles is not super happy with the fact that he's facing an evil version of himself, but he's living in a world where, similar to Back to the Future Part 2, his dad is dead.
Right.
Because of the result of, and I'm very curious if we are going to see an extended sequence of the universe if things had gone right, because you talked about not expecting that twist. In the Marvel canon, when Marvel created Miles to begin with, there was one. He was in the Ultimate Universe. He was not in the main 616 comic book universe. And eventually he was the elements that people did like from that universe. There weren't very many. He was absorbed into the main canon.
Right.
So the existence of another Miles. Now, I haven't read Spider-Man or Spider-Geddon, where they may have introduced a different version of Miles. But in mainstream canon, there's only ever one. So they're already doing something that never would have expected. And the fact that it's all of the elements that are there for you, that when he is escaping Miguel O'Hara's universe, like where is he going?
Right.
His data wouldn't be in the system.
Right.
If he's not supposed to exist.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, and that's what I find pretty interesting as well, too, because when you look at the different variants that we have met to this point, they have mostly been some iteration of a Peter, there's been a Peter Mary Jane, a Peter Gwen, formula, essentially. It's tweaked to a certain extent, but there's always some element of a Peter, essentially. If Miles was truly meant to be a Spider-Man, then in other multiverses, there should be multiversal Miles, you would assume, as well, too, showing up. And so the fact that there hasn't been yet one, I find to be pretty interesting. Especially now that they're introducing the concept that he wasn't supposed to be the one.
Yeah. Well, and we get to meet, there's the occasional difference with, I'm assuming, your favorite character in the film, Spider-Punk.
Yes.
And we get Miguel O'Hara, and then some of that I think comes down to the fact that the most popular versions of the character have been Peter Parker. Like the variety of the versions or variants that the MCU's been using, like, have been Peters. Right? And one of the things that I'm most excited for in Beyond is the new team that Gwen is going to use to save
Yeah.
Miles.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
get the Penny, who we do get a cameo from twice in the film. She shows up for multiple scenes because she's in the
Yes.
Spider People
In a new robot.
in a new robot, more of
Yeah.
mech, like it's more streamlined mech suit as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
an actual spider body. And Spider Noir is back, Spider Ham is back, but with the additions of Hobie, I guess
Yeah.
mainly being the new addition,
Yeah.
and then Peter B. Parker. Oh,
Yeah.
and I to explain how much I loved the fuzzy robe and slippers and Mayday
Let me
Parker.
let me go one step further. The hat that Mayday wears, I'm convinced is not animation.
It's
It
just
looked
a wool hat.
so real. I couldn't stop looking at her hat. I couldn't stop looking at the fabric of her hat. It looked like I was looking at a legitimate wool hat. The
Mhm.
animation on Mayday's hat was so unbelievable.
Yeah, and the fact that the last shot of the movie is her pulling the wool hat down, ready for the mission to save Miles.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's so good. Like, and there are elements like one of the things I'd be curious if people have been critical of, and it's not something that I personally am not, is this being, it's interesting because it's technically a sequel while also being half of a movie, but in the terms of it being on its own film, I would say 99% of the story it's telling is finished in this
Mhm.
film, similar to Avengers Infinity War, where the focus of that story was Thanos. There are things that were not resolved, but
Yeah.
your lead character
I even
was.
chalk it up to like the Harry Potter movies.
Oh, you think
Like
so? Okay.
there were stories that took place in it. You knew there was a bigger story being told. It ended with some resolve, but it always ended with some sort of dangling participle of like, all right, we're going to get into this one in the next one. You
Yeah.
know, I would never fault any of the Harry Potter movies for not being their own individual stories for where they were, but I always view them as part of a bigger thing. So it
Yeah.
didn't, when I got to the end of this movie, I wasn't disappointed in the least because I was just like, okay, well, I know we're getting another one. But I'm finding out that there's a lot of people who did not know this. Like
Oh, really?
they weren't aware that this is part one of two parts or part two of overall three kind of thing. So
Mhm.
I think Sony is trying to double down a little bit and get that word out there so that people aren't as surprised. But
Well, and like I had mentioned this, which is if sitting through this, you're like, this isn't over. Well, yeah, that means you are ready for that. You're ready for Beyond,
right, right. And
which
the truth
is.
is they would have had to have been working on Beyond simultaneously because as you mentioned, it was 5 years of production on this. And now theoretically they have less than a year before Beyond hits in March of 2024. There's just no way possible. They have to have been working simultaneously on both of them.
I would have loved to just be, I guess I wouldn't say fly, but a spider on the wall in the writing room where this is getting scripted out, and they get to Miles gets trapped in Earth 42. He's about to break loose because he's in chains. That's one of the things. Like Miles's use of his venom powers and
Right,
the
right,
evolution of that, and his conversation with Hobie, who is Spider Punk, and just sort of like he's gearing up for the next fight of his life.
right.
And they're like, "That's great. What page are we on?" I think we might need to make this two separate movies.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Which so we've is there anything left you want to talk about across before we get into hopes or speculation for Beyond?
No, I want to let's start getting into Beyond because I think that that's where we're naturally progressing. And my belief system, and I really did believe that it was that this is how the cliffhanger was going to be, was that by the end of Across, and we got a different cliffhanger, obviously. It was going to introduce some version of live action. Like I think
Hmm.
Beyond means incorporating live action somehow, and whether they are holding out for that's when they're going to bring Tom Holland in some way, shape, or form. Because like we know that when he re-upped his contract, he's down for Spider-Man 4 and quote unquote one other Marvel movie, you know, of to be determined at a later date, sort of thing. And everyone jumps to the conclusion that that was going to be one of the Avengers films, you know, or maybe they would put him into Daredevil Born Again.
It feels
But
like a
what if,
waste of the contract.
yeah, but like, what if it's to use him in the live action portions of Beyond the Spider Verse? Which then eventually I think allows them to cast a live action Miles Morales essentially, and have Miles become the Spider-Man of that Sony universe.
The only part of that I don't want them to do, and it has nothing to do with how great it would be, is that if there is live action footage, not footage, scenes, I guess technically would be the description, in Beyond, it is no longer eligible for the animated Oscar.
I understand that, sure.
It's stupid, but we talked about the Lego movie. It was not considered eligible because of the live
Okay,
action
so does the
sequences.
Venom scene knock it out of animation?
I don't know. I didn't even thought that's a very funny sequence. I half expected Venom to show up
Yeah,
in
I
that
did too.
moment,
I did too.
which would have been really funny. I don't know. That's a good point. I'm not sure. I hope it doesn't.
I hope it doesn't either, but that's okay. I've got my eyes on bigger prizes. This should be in a
Yes,
best picture category.
it's
Stop
true.
with
If
stop with the
there's
animation
been
category.
there's been three, I think, in film history, only three
Be-
animated films to get there,
Beauty and the Beast, Toy Story 3. I can't think of the
and
other one.
Up
Oh, Up got it too. Okay, that makes
and
sense.
Up got in. I think so. I may be wrong on that. I feel like it was the first
That
10
sounds
minutes
right.
deserved it alone.
Yeah, very true.
Yes, it is gearing up for live action stuff is interesting because it's one of the elements that it's funny to talk about a different studio doing it, but I think Star Wars has struggled to do, where you get so used to these voice versions of these characters the longer you spend with them,
Hmm.
that it feels, and I wouldn't say it's insulting, it's not me, but like Shamik Moore does such a phenomenal job with this character
Hmm.
that the fact that he's 28 unfortunately takes him out of the running of playing.
Or
Well,
so he says it doesn't. He claims it
well,
doesn't.
it's true. I don't know if you saw this today. You might have. I thought it was very funny. I think it was yesterday was Tom Holland's birthday, and he
Yes.
turned 27, the
Yes.
age that Tobey Maguire was when he was cast as high school Peter Parker for
Oh, that's
the
pretty
original
funny.
Spider-Man.
That's very funny.
So it's true. It's not impossible, but I would hope more so just based on we eventually will likely get a Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6. And while I'm sure it would be done well, I would prefer that this, if it has live action elements, sticks to its own corner of the Spider-Verse and
Okay.
doesn't worry about the MCU,
Mhm.
because and we've talked about this episode and previously, if you are able to do multiple versions of Peter Parker, there's no reason in my mind, if somebody does it well, you can introduce a Miles in Spider-Man 4, Spider-Man 5, insert
Mhm.
home in the title or whatever, and do that where a satisfying conclusion that I'm assuming we'll get. Again, if we're disappointed by Beyond, I would be utterly shocked
Right,
after
right, right.
watching Across the Spider-Verse that it's this Miles's story as opposed to now Miles is in the MCU.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I know what you're
Like
saying.
it's so many cooks in the kitchen that made this work, and I wanted to shout out specifically Joaquim de Santos, who was one of the
Mhm.
directors of the film, who's worked in every animated show I've ever loved. And the
Okay.
fact that he got a shot to do probably, or I mean, I'm gonna, in my opinion, the best Spider-Man movie of all time is incredible. Having everything that guy's worked on,
Right.
like getting to jump to animated feature, is something that I was super excited about because I've seen what he can do in the television animated realm.
Right.
So there's a
He's
lot of
pretty
things.
impressive.
It's insane, and the fact that these movies need three directors is not surprising remotely.
Well, and Kent Powers is one who I can't get enough of, to be honest with
That's
you.
it's
I mean, Soul was my number one film, the year it came out.
Mhm.
and this is going to be my number one film. I don't care what else comes.
Well, One Night in
And
Miami was also something really special.
yes, also terrific. What if the live action element is allowing Andrew to come back and be the mentor role to a younger Miles? Thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a great question. He's my personal favorite,
Yeah.
so I would be excited. Being somebody who has no skin in the game, and an Andrew Garfield who's excited to be Spider-Man again. Sign me up right now. Insert the Fry meme. Shut up and take my money.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
while I thoroughly enjoyed No Way Home, in my humble opinion, as soon as he shows up, he steals that movie.
Yes.
What I would be very curious about, and one thing we didn't get in this one is, are we going to get more of a Chris Pine Spider-Man?
Oh, well, I mean, I think he's dead.
Well, but
It
why aren't there multiple versions?
Yeah, true. Well, I think the other version was the Peter B. Parker, right? Like,
Mhm.
and then there are probably other Peters, similar Peters in other works. I mean, look at all the ones that we meet in the lobby.
Yeah, that's
Like,
fair.
are we going to get to peel back some of the masks on those versions, essentially? And
Mhm.
and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, the last thing I'll say before we wrap this up is that if there was supposed to be a Spider-Man in Miles's universe, in the canon of Miles, Spider-Man still has to die. So
Right.
we may see that if we do get a flashback of Earth 42, we may see another death of a Pine version of Spider-Man. So it is
Okay.
possible
Okay.
because Spider-Man does die for Miles to become Spider-Man. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you've got to go, so we will wrap this up. You're working on your next book. You can follow Sean on Twitter if you want to see his odyssey as he goes through the Bruce Willis films and
Yes, sir.
another long title that I can't. I'm hopefully we'll have you back on when that film is about to be published. Spider-Verse, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I know we could keep talking about it, but I'm not going to because I know we've both got things to do. Thank you so much for coming back onto the show.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm glad you loved the movie as much as I did.
Next week will be a review of Transformers Rise of the Beasts, and there may or may not be another special guest. I'll see you next time.